The Super Nintendo wasn't without its fair share of run and gunners, with Contra and Super Turrican being some of the more popular examples, but one that was missed by many is Doom Troopers, that puts you into the boots of one of two different soldiers as you travel the solar system in an effort to take down a group known as the Dark Legion, made up of gun-wielding zombies and mutants with plans for total domination. Now the game is made up of 8 stages that take you to different planets, with the gameplay offering a fast-paced and often challenging affair. There's not that much of a difference between the two soldiers, with one of them taking less amounts of damage and the other having a bit more firepower, but it doesn't really matter who you choose, with both of them getting a good selection of weapons such as machine guns, grenade launchers and special abilities like launching fireballs that round out your options when it comes to dealing with a varied amount of enemies. For a Super Nintendo game, the visuals are one area where Doom Troopers really excels, and for its time was incredibly gruesome, with enemies falling to pieces once being taken out, or their heads exploding followed by gushes of blood. The character models themselves are quite impressive regardless of all of the gore, and they'll no doubt remind you of Donkey Kong Country, with the same technique being deployed to create their pseudo 3D look. When it comes down to it, Doom Troopers isn't exactly the best run and gunner you're gonna find on the Super Nintendo, but it cooks up a respectable take on the genre, so if you're looking for something new to give a go on the system, it's well worth taking a look at. With heavy hitters like Mario Kart and F-Zero, it was all too easy for many of the other racing games on the system to fall through the cracks and never really receive the fanfare they deserved. Battle Cars is one of them, which all takes place in a post-apocalyptic world where violent car races have become the norm, and it sees you jumping into one of 3 different vehicles where you've got to take on a series of races that, instead of having to complete laps, tasks you from getting from point A to point B. At the beginning, there's not much difference between the 3 different cars apart from their colour, but as you complete each race, you'll start to earn money that can be spent on a whole variety of different upgrades, from a range of different tyres to help improve your handling to different engine types to increase your speed. But the most interesting has to be the range of weapons you can buy and equip, such as homing missiles to sliding explosive discs that all have their own advantages when it comes to dealing with your rivals out on the track. It ends up feeling like a cross between F-Zero and Twisted Metal, and as for the racing itself, it's incredibly fast paced, with each of the tracks coming along with their own look and layout that slowly ramps up the difficulty as you progress. But where Battle Cars differs from most of its kind is the introduction of boss races that pop up in between the different levels and give you 2 laps in which to defeat them. These end up being some of the more challenging moments in the game. It's just a shame that you don't get the chance to unlock and use their unique cars for yourself though. For those of you who are on the lookout for a new racer to play on the Super Nintendo and don't want to settle for the obvious choices, Battle Cars will not disappoint. When it comes to RPGs on the Super Nintendo, it's often considered the golden era, with plenty of games that continue to influence new releases right up to this day. One that holds up really well is Aretha, that never released outside of Japan, but thanks to its fans, it's now fully translated for Western audiences to give it a go. It's essentially the sequel to a series of Game Boy games that takes place 100 years after their events, and focuses on a young woman known as Ariel. She finds herself on a journey to stop the evil schemes of an empire who have their eyes on the kingdom, and it's down to you and several friends you'll meet along the way to bring them down. To be fair, it's all pretty cliche in terms of story, and there's nothing that really stands out, but it's with its gameplay that Aretha truly succeeds. It's in every sense a classic turn-based RPG that sees you having to explore the world and go from town to town in order to progress, with the random encounters against a huge amount of different enemies allowing you to gain experience and slowly level up your party and watch them grow. What's a little different though is how you learn new skills and magic, and instead of buying or learning them as you get stronger, it's all tied to continually using spells to unlock new ones, which may seem a bit odd at first. It's nothing that ruins the game as a whole, but it perhaps would have been a bit better to give the player a bit more freedom in how each character evolves. One of my favourite aspects of the game though is its presentation, and while the kingdom itself may seem a bit basic, it's during battle where the incredibly detailed sprites of the enemies really impress, with plenty of animations that come along with each hit or spell that truly brings the world of the game to life. So if you're like me and have always been fond of going back and trying out old RPGs, Aretha is one not to miss. The Super Nintendo was one of the greatest consoles to own if you were a fan of shooters, with the likes of R-Type and Gradius making an appearance, but one of its lesser known games, Imperium, was just as good. It all takes place on a distant planet where human life disappeared and was replaced by robots that find themselves on the cusp of a power struggle between those high up in society and the slaves that do their bidding. After building what can only be described as a Gundam-inspired mech, you take to the skies to fight the oppressors in just over 6 different stages, and as you would guess, each of the stages are packed full of enemies to destroy. You've got 4 different weapons to help get the job done: your standard red bullets, a wave shot, as well as a directional shot, and lightning that rounds off your options. You'll also occasionally come across smart bombs that send a wave of missiles from the bottom to the top of the screen that are best saved for when you find yourself in a jam. As with most shooters though, it's the power-up system that either makes or breaks it, and here in Imperium it's all about experience points rather than collecting different items. For every enemy you take down, you'll earn a small amount of experience points that counts towards leveling up the power of your weapons. You begin with the red bullet gun at level 1, and your first level up will earn you the wave gun, then the lightning weapon, and finally the directional shot. The very next experience level gained will take your red bullet gun up to level 2, and continues until they're all fully powered up. If you take a hit though, the weapon you're currently using goes down a level, so evading is just as important as the shooting itself. All in all, Imperium isn't without its flaws, mainly its rather basic look and bouts of slowdown, but for fans of shooters there's plenty here to enjoy. Legend is a side-scrolling beat-em-up that shares a lot in common with the likes of Golden Axe with its medieval setting and focus on fast-paced gameplay. It's made up of just over 7 levels to fight through, with the player taking up the role of a knight who's tasked with defeating an evil wizard. Now the story isn't exactly anything you wouldn't have seen before, but as with most beat-em-ups, it's the gameplay that's front and center, and it's here where Legend really hits it home. As you would expect, you've got a few options when it comes to attacking, the main one being your sword, which can be used to land up to 3 hit combos, as well as a jumping kick, magic, and a ranged attack that when used takes away a bit of your health. It may not sound like much, but due to the sheer quantity of enemies on the screen, you've got to carefully manage your approach and not just button mash and hope for the best. At the beginning of the game it starts out quite easy, but in later stages it adds in long range attackers and enemies that can block, which really ramps up the difficulty. A big part of the game, as with many others in the genre, are the variety of boss fights throughout the 7 different stages, and it's here where you'll find the biggest challenge to overcome. They're far more of a threat than the usual grunts and require you to carefully study their attack patterns for the right moment to strike. It's in these moments where the use of your magic attacks comes in handy, and especially when you're surrounded by enemies, which lets off a screen clearing attack that can only be performed by collecting magic jars throughout each level. When compared to similar games on the Super Nintendo, Legend isn't exactly as well polished or as thought out, but it's a really competent game that any fan of beat-em-ups will no doubt enjoy. Platformers were one of the Super Nintendo's greatest strengths, and no doubt one of the reasons it became so popular, with the likes of Super Mario World leading the charge. Of course, many other games were released over the years, and one that I only found out about recently is Holy Umbrella, that turned out to be a really great platformer despite some of its quirks. Unfortunately, it never left Japan, but it's easily playable today, and sees you jumping into the role of an unnamed hero who finds himself running home in the rain, and comes across a strange umbrella that transports him to another world. Upon arriving, he learns of an evil empire known as Dondera, who's looking to take over the world, and in order to return home, he's the one who's got to use the power of his umbrella to bring him down. What makes the game unique is how it's split into 2 separate playstyles. First, you've got the overworld that feels very much like an RPG, and sees you being able to walk around town and interact with a range of different NPCs, buy items or search for hidden treasures, and the other are the platforming levels themselves, which are made up of various enemies and obstacles to overcome, and this is where the umbrella comes into play. Throughout the game it can be upgraded with various abilities, such as being able to float for short periods of time or turning enemies into projectiles, and on top of this you can also switch into 2 different characters, one being a bird that allows you to fit through small spaces, and a girl who can wall jump and slide tackle. That really broadens your options when it comes to both exploring and combat, especially during the many boss fights throughout the different levels. Ultimately, Holy Umbrella ends up being a pretty unique platformer that's only let down by its short runtime, but it's still definitely worth trying out. Sailor Moon is no stranger to the world of games, and the Super Nintendo received a fair few based on the anime with various fighters and beat-em-ups, but one of my favourites is another story that took the series into the realm of RPGs. It doesn't retell any established story, and instead portrays a completely unique tale of its own that takes place in between the events of the show. After an evil sorceress arrives from the future who plans to alter the past in her favour, the Guardians come together to put a stop to her plans, which sees you having to travel across Crystal Tokyo and track down her minions and defeat them. On the gameplay front, it's very much a traditional setup, with the world being made up of many different locations to explore, which are filled with a cast of NPCs that help bring a great amount of personality to the world and the story that the game has to tell. But as with most RPGs, the battle system is a huge part of a game's success, and with another story's turn-based approach, it's pretty basic in terms of features, but it delivers a great amount of strategy for the player to get stuck into, with the usual options being available such as simple attacks to spells and the use of items. But what helps this stand out though is the inclusion of a mechanic known as link techniques that see all of the Guardians coming together and performing a synchronized attack that deals serious amounts of damage on the enemy. Throughout the game you'll get the chance to add all of the 10 Guardians into your party, but only 5 can be active at any given time, with each of them coming along with their own unique advantages that makes experimenting with them all vital to find the group that suits your approach. For any fan of Sailor Moon, another story is essential. It ends up being a pretty solid RPG that's a lot of fun to play through. There was no shortage of beat-em-ups on the Super Nintendo, with the likes of Battletoads and Final Fight. It was one of the best consoles to own for anyone into the genre. One game that never released for the system outside of Japan until recently though was Iron Commando, where you get the choice of 2 different characters to choose from. You've got Jack and Chang Li, and to be fair there's hardly any difference between the two and how they fight, and it ends up coming down to just who you like the look of. The gameplay itself sees you having a basic 3-hit combo, as well as being able to attack in the air, as well as perform throws when enemies are up close. To make up for the lack of options when it comes to fighting hand to hand, Iron Commando throws in a great selection of weapons, from bats to shotguns and pistols that pack a real punch. Mixing up the gameplay though and providing a break from the usual side-scrolling levels, you'll be thrown into vehicle-based levels that see you having to drive a range of different vehicles and deal with enemies at the same time. To be fair, difficulty is one aspect of the game that many might find a bit too much, and this is most apparent when it comes to the bosses who pull no punches. Of course, as with any game, it's nothing that you can't get used to and get better at, but the learning curve is quite steep, so if you like a game that's not afraid to challenge you, then Iron Commando will be right up your street. Emerald Dragon is an RPG that originally released way back in '89 for the PC 88 and would later go on to find a home on the Super Nintendo. As the player, you take on the role of a dragon living in seclusion with its tribe, and one day a young girl washes ashore whom you're assigned to take care of. Fast forward a few years and you've both grown up, but the girl has disappeared and returned to the land of humans where dragons are forbidden to go. Not wanting to give up on your friend, you shed your dragon skin and take on the form of a human to set out and ultimately find out what happened to her. In true RPG fashion, everything is not as simple as it seems, and it's not long until you're swept up into a grand plot with the fate of the world at stake. And although it might be a bit tropey, the battle system in Emerald Dragon is quite unique, and at the beginning of each fight you'll see all of your party members at the bottom of the screen with all of the enemies at the top. Each and every one of your actions is tied to a gauge from simply moving to attacking or casting spells, and as it slowly depletes it'll turn red, where any attack you pull off will be significantly weaker. This approach adds a great deal of strategy to each fight, which forces the player to plan ahead, but towards the end of the game it can be quite complicated and hard to keep on top of the enemy's advances, almost demanding that you get a grip on the system early on and form an array of tactics to help you cope with any situation the game may throw at you. By far though, it's the story that really helps Emerald Dragon excel, and even though the setup is a bit cliche, it's the ton of memorable characters and events that really help it stand out as one of the earliest examples of how an RPG could not only impress, but actually make you care for its characters in a way that no other games could. There are plenty of RPGs on the Super Nintendo that never got a release outside of Japan, but if you're looking to give one of them a go, make sure that Emerald Dragon is at the top of the list. Magic Knight Rayearth was yet another RPG that was based on a popular anime of its time that stayed quite faithful to the source material and saw the player taking on the roles of the three main characters from the show, Hikaru, Umi and Fu, as they all work towards rescuing a princess from an evil priest. For anyone with even a passing interest in the series, you'll no doubt find something to love with this RPG, but even those of you who are just fond of the genre will find it easy to get into. It's a pretty standard setup and it sees you and your party heading from location to location as you interact with various characters or shop for new items, and many of the towns will be instantly familiar to fans. Of course, when you're not travelling, you'll be getting into fights, and the battle system that the game presents is pretty straightforward. At the beginning you've only got basic attacks, but as you slowly level up you'll begin to learn a wide range of magic, which is where some of the more powerful attacks come into play. By far the most useful thing in battle though are the rune gods, which basically work like summons from Final Fantasy and provide some of the more devastating attacks that can really help during many of the tougher encounters throughout the game. On the whole, if you're looking for a great RPG to play on the Super Nintendo and have exhausted the usual suspects, then Magic Knight Rayearth is well worth booting up whether you're a fan of the series or not. Well, that does it for today's video. Keep an eye out for part 2 as that'll be coming up soon, so don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell to get notified about new videos. You can follow me on all of the socials which are linked below to stay up to date, and also join my growing community on Discord to meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with. I'd like to give a special shout out to my Patreon supporters Rhino, Skilljim, Shuden, Richard, Amy, Daniel, Dio, Road Rage, Strider, Pierre, Carl, Affinium Mind, Awesome Jacket Dude, Maximus, Scott, Alfred, Terry, Ryan, Alex, GameCube Galaxy, Curse Salaryman, Fake and Paddy J for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining my Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon, you'll find all of these links down below. As always, thanks for taking the time to check the video out. I'll catch you next time.